Well, we're going to continue this fourth ray exploration now with a presentation by Joleen DuBois. And she's been with us several times in the past, living nearby, which is so marvelous, not too far from Phoenix here. Joleen is a longtime teacher in the field of esoteric studies and ageless wisdom, founder of the White Mountain Education Association, which has already passed its 25th birthday, so it has been in existence for a good period of time right now. She's also the Dean of St. Sergius Seminary, right? University and Seminary, which is a new esoteric school founded in the year 2000. So it's marvelous to see these new schools coming into being now in various places. My sense is that what Joleen is going to work from in her talk today is going to be based upon some of the recent travels that she's done. She's spoken to several countries, visited 3 continents last year, spending some time at the Roerich Museum in Mongolia, which has given her a chance to look more deeply behind the work of Nicholas Roerich. And for those of you who don't know Nicholas Roerich or his work, this will be a wonderful introduction to one of the great artists of our time. She and her group at the White Mountain Education Association have translated a book about the life of Helena Roerich from the Russian, and who Nicholas Roerich's wife considered to be the mother of Agni Yoga. And they're now working on a translation from the diaries of Nina Fosdick, who was the first, I want to say, curator perhaps of the Roerich Museum in New York. And so, given this kind of exposure and background, able now to talk a lot about what is some of the ideas and thoughts and principles behind the work of Nicholas Roerich. So, I want to welcome Joleen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sheldon. The theme that I'm going to be presenting to this morning is called A Glimpse Behind the Art of Nicholas Roerich. Nicholas Konstantinovich Roerich was a painter, an archaeologist, a writer, a lawyer, and peace builder, and was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, on October 9th, 1874, and he died on December 13th, 1947. In the early part of the 20th century, Nicholas Roerich's work was very visible. He helped to create the Master Institute of the United Arts, the Roerich Museum, the Corona Mundi Institute, and the Himalayan Research Institute, all the while producing over 7,000 extraordinary paintings of intense beauty. When the Roerichs gathered their first students and started up their activities besides the regular spiritual meetings, the first thing was to start a school of all the arts, which they did in the parish house of a Greek church on West 54th Street. It was called the Master School of the United Arts. They had only one room, so the music classes had to make way for the art classes and vice versa. Then when they found financial support, they moved into a classy house on Riverside Drive and 103rd Street, which was about the size of the large house that is now next door to the current Roerich Museum in New York City. And they started the Roerich Museum along with the school. It was only a few years later that Corona Mundi was established mainly as a coordinating organization to organize everything having to do with the museum, including the buying and selling of the art, and also overseeing the school. With this being the 25th anniversary and the focus of this year's theme, invoking a spiritual renaissance, let peace prevail on earth through harmony, beauty, and art, it seems most appropriate to go to the meaning and symbolism of the paintings of this famous master artist, Nicholas Roerich. The art of Nicholas Roerich is a sacred art. It is interesting to see how Roerich's researches into the Stone Age and his early enthusiasm for this period has influenced all his work. It would seem to form the basis of his style, for many of his early paintings have a Neolithic grandeur of their own. And it also explains why he finds himself at home in every part of the world where nature is still intact and preserves some vestiges of this primeval beauty. Nicholas and Helena Roerich were both terribly fascinated with the multiple and mysterious colors found in the many rocks they found throughout their travels. All his life he erected an immense edifice of art, the foundations of which are firmly laid among the rocks and stones of all the countries of the earth, while the summits, like the highest peaks of the Himalaya, catch the light of the coming dawn. Let me quote a snippet from how N.K. described the unique character of his own work. From one of his lectures on the mural paintings in the Russian churches, he said, "Archangels of serene beauty of countenance, crowned with a dark yellow halo, float across the heavens, their immaculate white garments looking all the fresher by contrast with the deep blue background. And the gold is so well inserted, so perfectly adapted, that it never distracts the eye. These paintings have the quality of the most exquisite silk tapestries." End quote. The Queen of Heaven lasted only a few years and then began to separate from the wall. The method used to install the plaster underneath the painting didn't hold. So this fresco no longer exists. Helena Roerich said of her husband's paintings, "N.K.'s paintings are a precious gift to humanity, for they open up a new spiritual world to all those who see them." Nicholas Roerich, of the symbols found in his paintings, gave us some hints. He said, "My mountains are symbolic of spiritual ascent. Gates or doors denote either spiritual progress if the seeker has succeeded in crossing the threshold, or spiritual arrival if the seeker has reached the threshold, or a spiritual barrier if the gate or door is closed. Messengers are transmitters of God's wisdom. Water. Water stands for purification and renewal. And rivers that flow in a specific direction suggest transition and movement toward a goal. A little known fact is that N.K., while painting, communed with devas through color and thought. Devas are, as you know, attracted and nourished through thought and thought forms, so they worked to inspire him. And that spirit was captured in his work and painted into the etheric aura of his paintings. If you have visited the Roerich Museum in New York City and have felt the magic of his paintings, finding yourself awestruck as I did, and as if in the other worlds, you can imagine much of this is due to the magnetic vibrations of the presence of devas in his paintings. In one of his instructions to artists while in Maine, N.K. said, "A painter should often draw the surf, the sky, the rocks, in such a way that it looks like a photograph. In other words, something that only a blind man would not see." But the important thing is to capture the mood of nature on canvas. In speaking about his well-known master art teacher, Kunze, he shared a story which related to the nature of an artist. Kunze was a person of a very strong and strict character, and if someone were to come to him to complain about life, he would always reply, "If you need to be in a glass case to survive, you deserve your misfortunes." A good and true artist would continue to paint even in prison. Kunze asked a student, "And what do you do from 4 to 10? In the morning?" "Yes, in the morning." "Well, I sleep usually," said the student. "So you are sleeping your life away. While when I lived in Odessa, I used to paint for myself from 4 a.m. to 10, and then work as a retoucher at a photo studio from 10 a.m. to 6. Helena Roerich stated that once Kunze had commented to his students that were gathered around him and who had always wanted something from him, "In the end, you will all be asking me for money, while Roerich will be following his own path." Helena related a charming memory about her first encounter with a Roerich painting. She once went with her mother when she was about 19 years old. She once went with her mother to see an exhibit at the Academy. She walked around the entire exhibit and suddenly stopped in front of NK's paintings, The Elders, and told her mother peremptorily, "Here is a true talent." Then she started reading his name, Roerich, and disliked it terribly and had difficulty reading it. Once NK described a vision he had of Master M. He said, "M was near his tower, with snow and mountains in the distance. The snow even had a bluish tinge. It was so vivid that I could have just painted it as I saw it. This vision lasted for quite a long time." Fiat Rex, which means glory to the king, is a triptych that hung for years in the house in Kulu and now hangs in the International Roerich Center in Moscow. The male figure in the center panel is Master M, who is standing full length. He holds a circlet in his hand with one stone affixed to it. Elena called the circlet the crown of the brotherhood. In the panels to his left and right are two figures, male and female, in medieval garb. These represent Nicholas on the left and Helena Roerich on the right. When the painting Fiat Rex went to Moscow, it was considered to be very sacred and secret and was kept in a separate room. To describe the use of layers in his mountainscapes, NK said, "Two worlds find expression in the Himalayas. One is the world of the soil, full of the enchantment of these parts. Deep ravines and grotesque hills rear up to the cloud line, into which melt the smoke of villages and monasteries. And all this earthly wealth shades into the blue mist of the rolling distances. A chain of clouds crowns the lower mist. Above this synthetic picture, it is strange, unexpectedly startling, to behold new ramparts mounting the clouds. Above the nebulous waves, above the twilight, glimmer the sparkling snows. Erect, infinitely beauteous, stand these dazzling, impassable peaks. Two distinct worlds intersected by a mist. The painting Cry of the Serpent was painted as the result of a dream that Helena Roerich had. And here's the dream. Elena and NK are riding on a wagon somewhere in Russia. It's black, dark all around. A thunderstorm is raging. The land is empty. And suddenly an enormous serpent soars into the sky and then falls on the ground. Its tail divides in two, and the two branches cover the sky. Under the influence of this dream, NK painted Cry of the Serpent. Now here are some well-known pictures of spiritual icons. Lao Tzu is shown astride an ox on a path through a bamboo grove on his way to the sacred Mount Kailash. Confucius rides in a wooden horse-drawn cart through a landscape that looks as if it has been painted by a Chinese artist, complete with a mountain rising out of the mist in the distance. St. Sergius, the builder, is chopping wood in a stylized northern fir tree forest as a bear looks on. Muhammad stands atop Mount Hira, receiving the Quran from the Archangel Gabriel. Zoroaster in the painting Ahura Mazda is receiving the fire from God. Padmasambhava is portrayed in the subtropical greenery of a stylized Siamese landscape, receiving Buddha's command to bring his teaching to Tibet. Dorje, the daring one, is seen confronting a fiery vision in the mountains. He holds a bell and a dagger, ritual objects of Tibetan meditation. The sight before him is a terrifying face engulfed in flames, which seems to be rising out of the barren landscape, and has 3 eyes, a crown made of skulls, and a tongue of flame shooting out of its gaping mouth. Roerich's depiction of Christ, entitled Signs of Christ, shows Christ seated, his back to us on a mound of sand in the desert, tracing images in the sand with his staff. It is a depiction of the quote, "During the night march, the guide lost his way. After some seeking, I found Christ seated upon a sand mound, looking at the sands flooded by moonlight. I said to him, we've lost the way. We must await the indication of the stars." Then taking his bamboo staff, he traced a square around the impression of his foot, saying, "Verily I say, by human feet." And making the impression of his palm, he surrounded it also with a square, "Verily by human hands." Between the squares he drew the semblance of a pillar surrounded by an ark. He said, "Oh, how Aum shall penetrate into the human consciousness." The mother of the world is most universal of all teachers was a subject Roerich painted many times. As Roerich himself expressed it, to both East and West, the image of the Great Mother, womanhood, is the bridge of ultimate unification. At a recent interview I conducted with Daniel Enton, director of the Roerich Museum in New York, he described the painting as a woman sitting on a piece of the earth which is broken away and is floating in space. She has left as a result of the paternalistic period and the denigration of woman. As Daniel said when he looks at the painting, he sees her piece of earth moving toward him as the age of woman comes near. Some of the symbols in the painting are the two constellations in the sky, the Big Dipper and the Pleiades, which are made up of little human figures or bodhisattvas. In the foreground, there are two figures imploring her return. They seem to be male and female, and Daniel described them as Eastern and Western figures. Being in close contact with the Mahatmas, Nicholas and Helena knew that a part of their mission was to find the abode of the masters, Shambhala. Roerich knew that for Buddhists, the path to Shambhala is the path to enlightenment, and that righteous seekers are guided on their way by a multitude of symbols and signs and messages. It was this path Roerich believed that had led him to India and would soon lead him into the heart of Asia. Yet the discovery of the way would be a matter of utmost delicacy. Numerous hardships and great obstacles had to be overcome before it could be reached. Master Moria said, "Do not think that our community is hidden from humanity by impassable walls. The snows of the Himalayas that hide us are not obstacles for true seekers, but only for investigators. Give thyself to thy work, and I will lead thee on the path of success in the yonder world." The greatest and holiest, Tangla. When the Roerichs and their expedition, including Sina Fosdick and the Francis Grant, were traveling near the Tangla Mountains in what is now called a border, or is a border region between Tibet and China, there was an incident. They both wrote in their diaries about a period of time when the Roerichs, Nicholas, Helena, and George, were missing for several days. It was at a place in the trail where the Roerichs decided to erect a stupa to Shambhala to mark the spot. They all built the stupa around some sacred texts, and out of nowhere appeared some lamas to lead the circumambulation. The stupa was consecrated, and during the long process, the Roerichs disappeared. A few days later, they came back, and they never said where they had gone. But Nicholas painted two pictures that showed them with the masters in the caves of Shambhala. So for those that can see, they will know. And these two paintings are Burning the Darkness and Treasure of the Mountain. If you get a chance to see these pictures at the museum in New York, look closely and you will see Elena and Nicholas very clearly. Or ask Daniel, the museum director, to point them out to you. Roerich said, "It is impossible to describe the beauty of this snowy kingdom these many days. Such variety, such expressiveness of line, so many fantastic cities, so many multicolored brooks and streams, and such memorable purple and moonlit cliffs. Moreover, the astonishing ringing silence of the wilderness. And people stop quarreling among themselves, and all differences are obliterated, and everyone without exception soaks in the beauty of the mountain wilderness." As Roerich describes one of the old believers, he is not astonished at anything. He knows the oars and the deer. He knows the little bees and especially the secret traditions. He knows the herbs and the flowers. And he not only knows how and where the flowers grow and where the roots are hidden, but he loves them and delights in them. Gathering a great variety of varicolored grasses, they reach up into his gray beard. His face lights up. He pets them and he speaks of their usefulness. He is verily Pantalaimon, the healer. It is not dark witchery, but knowledge that draws from experience. The Roerichs returned to the United States at the end of the Central Asian expedition in April of 1929. It was then that Nicholas learned he had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by the University of Paris. The nomination was supported by scientific institutions throughout the world. He was recommended for his efforts to achieve peace through raising the cultural levels of nations, the constant promotion of brotherhood, and the creation of culture and beauty in all spheres of life. But he had come to New York to renew efforts to win support for an international treaty to protect and preserve cultural institutions and monuments in times of war. The text of the Roerich Pact included the description of a flag designed by Roerich that came to be known as the Banner of Peace. The Banner of Peace was meant to represent the protection of humanity's cultural achievements. With the knowledge that the pact had firm support and that progress was being made in the adoption of the pact, the Roerichs returned to India. The signing of the Roerich Peace Pact took place April 15, 1935. Some paintings with special significance to me. I traveled in 2001 to Darjeeling, India for the Vesak full moon. Since I was going to be in the area, I researched the travels of the Roerichs in that area. The Roerichs had visited Darjeeling and the area of Sikkim several times over the years, and Helena Roerich had moved to Kalimpong, a nearby village, after Nicholas had passed on. One of the places mentioned by Nicholas Roerich was a cave, which could only be accessed by a suspension bridge over a raging river. We asked our guide if this place still existed, and when we read the passage from the book to him, he smiled and he nodded. The next day we found ourselves crossing a little more modern, but it didn't seem like it, version of the bridge, although still a swaying suspension type, and approaching a very sacred area used for ceremonies in the spring year when the water rages under the bridge. No locals were there, and we went into the cave, and by the way, this is one of the only kind of such a picture. First time it was ever photographed. We went into the cave, which opened up to the sky for several feet, then narrowed into a short tunnel that had to be crawled through, to a small opening or room, just large enough for a monk to sit and meditate, not even large enough to stand up. In the back of the little cave or room was a large rock, much too large to have come through the opening, and not the same type of rock as the cave. On this rock was painted what the guide called the Master. As you can see in this comparison of a photo of this rock and a painting by Nicholas Roerich, he must have seen it also. The legend was that Padmasambhava meditated in this cave and was attacked by the devils or elementals, which were trying to keep him from bringing the teachings of the Buddha to Tibet. It goes on to say that he rose up, expanding to a huge being where he overcame demons. This cave is where the transformation began, and our guide pointed out the smooth, rounded impression in the ceiling where his head moved the rock. Here in the U.S., the Roerichs traveled to the Southwest to visit the art colonies around Santa Fe, and they saw many examples of American Indian culture. As he traveled, he showed the Native Americans pictures of the people he had met in Mongolia and Tibet, and asked them if they could be related. He was told of the legends of the people who came from the great western lands to settle the lands here. Nicholas painted several pictures based on the cave dwellings and the Grand Canyon, including one called The Miracle. In 2009, a few of us, and I think 3 of us are in this room right now, visited Mongolia to see the places connected with Shambhala and the Roerichs. Because the Roerichs had traveled to Urga, the capital now called Ulaanbaatar, and lived there for several months. In 1926 and 27, there is now a Roerich Museum in the city. The museum is in the house that they rented while they were there. This is an interesting story as well, but perhaps for another time. One of the first places we visited was a monastery about 4 hours out of town. The drive was magnificent through emerald green valleys to a spot seemingly in the middle of nowhere. We took several photos when we saw that it resembled some of N.K.'s paintings. See for yourself. Here in Phoenix, we were introduced to a wonderful woman that was part of the Ralph Houston group in New York during the transition from the original Master Institute of Art to the present museum on 107th Street. This woman told us a few stories about the paintings. The first story was about the large portrait of Nicholas by his son Svetoslav. It shows him in ceremonial robes, and it is about 5 foot by 5 foot. She does not have this particular painting, but she was with Mr. Ralph Houston when he was offered the picture for $400. And you know, if you're familiar with Nicholas Roerich's paintings, they sell for millions now. The group raised the money, and they had the painting for a short while when Mr. Horst contacted them and asked for it back. He had found other buyers in Florida, but they would pay more. They made a deal for a trade of some of the other paintings, and the beautiful portrait was returned. The next time our friend was in New York City, she saw that there was going to be another sale of Roerich originals, and she went to see what was left. The portrait was there. Evidently, the people in Florida had changed their minds. She told Ralph Houston that the portrait was again available, and while she was there, Horst offered her a good deal on a few of the other paintings. She bought several of the smaller ones, all of them for just a few $100s. Included in her collection were the portrait painted in 1937, and then this one called The Monk Leaves the City. His very last painting, which he never finished, was painted in 1947, just months before he died. It is called The Command or Call of the Teacher. That's it. Thank you. Oh.
You got it.
I'll take a couple of questions. If I don't know the answers right away, I can find them for you later. Do you have any questions? Yes.
I have many questions, but not to ask you at this moment.
Okay.
What I would like, I'm Jean Bates.
Yes, okay.
And I'm
Jean.
going to be showing some beautiful paintings of Roerich tomorrow evening. But what I would like to bring up is that Lama Glenn Mullen, who I believe you've met, Jolene. Is
I
that right?
spent several weeks with him.
Yes. Well, I have spent some time with him also in class last year at Crotona Institute in Ojai.
Mm-hmm.
And also he came to my studio not last week, maybe the week before, and did a class and did a presentation called Roerich in India.
Okay.
And before that, I gave a presentation with two people that went to Roerich's place called Roerich's House in Mongolia.
Right.
Anyway, Glenn gave me 4 videos to bring here. And I was wondering if there might be a moment when some of you who are interested might like to see some videos of the Roerich House, the restoration of the Roerich House in Mongolia, and also some of the other work that's going on there. It's quite
Just
exciting.
know that 2 of those pictures were of the Roerich House that
Yes.
is now the museum that
Yes.
we showed. Uh-huh.
So anyway, I just wanted to offer that as an opportunity for anybody that might be interested. I don't know when we could do it, maybe during lunch or something. I could show you these videos. Anyway, thank you so much, Jolene. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to your presentation. We had a wonderful time in Mongolia. I can say now that I'm home. I had written a poem called The Call to Shambhala many years ago, and metaphorically speaking, I was thinking about what Shambhala must be like and the approach to Shambhala, and I talked in that poem about the emerald green hills of Shambhala, and that's all I could think of when we got into Mongolia. Not into the city of Ulaanbaatar, but out into the countryside. It is primeval, it is pristine, it is colorful, it is so incredibly beautiful and quiet. And you can imagine, it is a rough country. The natives, the Mongolians, they are so beautiful. Their physical structure, their face, the women are just coming into themselves now. They're becoming highly educated. It was wonderful to speak with some of them. And rough headquarters, staying in what we would call tents. It was quite an experience for me. The bathrooms are outside. Cows would come and moo in the front door. And horses. But the being together with co-workers, and Olivia was responsible for bringing this trip all about. It was one of those memories you never forget. And so when we read now about Mongolia and the Gobi Desert and Shambhala, it becomes real. We also believe, since you haven't asked a question, which I'm grateful for, when we were in Sikkim, and we were so fortunate to find the guide who had been educated in Harvard, so he spoke English quite well. He knew of the Roerichs. He had read several of Nicholas Roerich's books. Okay, Olivia, let me finish my story out real quick. He was the one that agreed to take us to this cave. He was the one that agreed to allow us to photograph and get into the part of the cave that no tourists, no foreigners are allowed to visit. So I just felt it was meant to be. It was a terrific experience. Olivia.
Well, Jolene, I was just going to say that indeed the people that went on our pilgrimage, and it was a spiritual pilgrimage called In the Footsteps of the Roerichs, The Quest for Shambhala. And it was in 2009. And so Jolene was part of this, and Sherry Sue was part of this, and you all know Lynn Tara Hebenstreit, who will be here later on, and some other people. And we did have Glenn Mullen Lewis, who's a dear friend of mine, who had taken me to Tibet, and Mongolia, and so we had a wonderful adventure in following in the footsteps of the Roerichs to be in that Shambhala energy and going to Shambhala and the Gobi and a number of things. So maybe this is the seed for a future presentation.
Thank you.